Hello, and welcome to another episode of Lore and Crime, a podcast where we dive into the shadowy depths of history, where true crime and chilling events inspire dark fictional tales that blur the line between fact and legend. In 1692, New England was gripped with hysteria. Winter had barely loosened its grip when rumors began to spread through the parishes of Salem. Children fell to the floor in strange fits. They screamed, clawed at their throats, spoke in tongues. Ministers called it witchcraft, physicians found no cure, and the villagers, they were terrified. Soon, the accusations spread like fire. Neighbors turned on neighbors, husbands on wives, children on their parents. By midsummer, the jails of Essex County overflowed with the accused. Ordinary people, midwives, servants, and widows. They became symbols of evil. This is the story of one of those well-documented Salem witch trials. The case of Anne Foster. On the 25th of June, 1692, the town of Andover, Massachusetts, was caked in gray. The night was filled with a bitterness particular to New England. The Ballard house stood apart, not from pride, but from the stubbornness of a man who had cleared land with his own splintered hands. There were 3 rooms, each with its own draft, and a bar near enough to the kitchen door that the scent of cow and old hay tracked in on Joseph's boots every night. On such a night, he found himself standing at Elizabeth's bedside. He was a man unfit for stillness, yet lately the world seemed determined to pin him beneath its thumb. Elizabeth was the color of frost. Her hair, once a pretty brown, now looked like damp straw scraped from a cellar floor. The fever had taken her in slow degrees, a creeping thing that made sport of hope. There were days she would almost seem herself, and then she'd cough so long, her chest buckled inward, and the sound stuck to the beams like pitch. He had sent for the village doctor, a drunk, but the only one in the village. He had sent for the midwife, who knew more of women's bodies than any man. He had even consulted the widow Holgate, who was rumored to have a thumb in the cauldron, and who, upon his insistence, gave him a powder to stir into Elizabeth's broth. Nothing eased her. Now, as the wind battered the shutters and the fire sulked in the hearth, Joseph watched his wife's eyelids flutter. Her breath was a shallow, timed drip. He poured a ladle of boiled milk and set it beside her, but her hands made no movement toward it.
"Elizabeth,"
he said, as if the word alone could charm her back. Her eyes split open, clouded, the blue gone almost white. She looked at him.
"Joseph, I dreamed the water was rising in the house."
He knelt, feeling the ache in his knees as penance.
"It's only the river. It will crest and fall. I have sandbagged the sill."
She watched him with odd, patient amusement.
"It's not the river. It's a blackness. I felt it in my mouth."
He had no answer for that. He pressed her palm with his thumb and waited for her to squeeze back, as she had done 100 times before. Tonight, her hand remained limp, like a dead fish. A thing surrendered to the stream. At dawn, the village was a skeletal thing, the stripped trees, the church steeple rising like a white finger against the leaking sky. Joseph went about his chores in a silence that threatened to swallow the house. He was not the kind of man that would entertain gossip with a woman gathered at the common well. Instead, he worked. The land, at least, responded to the lash. But word traveled in the early summer wind, and Joseph could not help but hear the rumors. There had been other illnesses. Cattle born with 2 heads, chicken that hatched blind and circled themselves until they died. Children in the next town coughing up green foam. It was an evil year, and the old ones at the tavern muttered about the signs and portents. The daughter of the old foster widow, who once braided Elizabeth's hair for Christmastide, was now said to be consorting with familiar spirits, and had been seen walking the fields at night, hands held out as if to pluck something invisible from the air. He thought such tales a comfort for those who preferred dread with a face, but in the root of his skull, where he kept things he did not say aloud, Joseph was not certain. His wife's decline had no shape, no logic, but he had seen at times the way she looked at the corners of the room, as if expecting to be addressed by a presence that he could not see. By the second week, the fever no longer broke. Sometimes she called his name, sometimes names he did not recognize. At other times, she shrieked, then gasped, as if she'd bitten her own tongue through. On the first Sunday in July, a voice rapped at the door. Joseph expected the parson or perhaps the neighbor's wife with broth. Instead, it was Widow Holgate, the local herbalist, wearing a hood that shadowed half her face.
"Is your wife still in bed?"
she said. Her voice was neither accusation nor greeting. He let her in, and she went directly to Elizabeth's bed. The widow knelt, pressed her hand to the woman's forehead, and then leaned close to whisper a string of words that did not belong to any prayer Joseph had ever heard.
Will she live?
He asked, because he needed a verdict. The widow's eyes lingered on the bed.
"She is beyond help."
He wanted to challenge the old woman. Instead, he held his anger.
She's still fighting. She answers to me, sometimes.
"She answers you, but something else is listening. There is evil here that must be rooted out."
This sounded like nonsense, but the words stuck. He waited until the widow left and then poured himself 2 cups of gin, one for himself and one to leave on the sill for the devil, if he felt so inclined. The devil, for his part, did not drink, but Joseph did. That night, Joseph's dreams were riddled with teeth. He saw Elizabeth floating above the river, her bed trailing a wake of black lace. And when he reached to pull her in, she dissolved under his touch, a puff of dandelion blown apart by his own hand. He woke before sunrise. Elizabeth's fever was worse. It was then, as the sun shivered over the edge of the fields, that Joseph realized what he must do. The stories had come in from Salem, carried by tradesmen and desperate mothers. There were girls there who could sniff out the devil, who could draw a witch's name from the hollow of a sick child's breath. Such talk was madness, a fever of its own. But what did it matter if it worked? A man would make himself a fool, a heretic, or a monster if it meant keeping his house whole. He looked at Elizabeth, who was sleeping, already dead to the rest of the world. Joseph dressed with care. He chose his best wool waistcoat and combed the river clay from his hair. He kissed Elizabeth's cheek, which was cold and damp, and left the house before he could lose his will. The road to Salem was worse than he'd imagined. Deep ruts, muck thick enough to steal a boot. But he drove onward with purpose, and when he reached the edge of Salem, he convinced himself that he would return with the famed girls or not at all. The next day, Joseph returned home from Salem with the 2 girls in tow. Their words seemed otherworldly to him, each laughter or snores a reminder that he had invited this madness. Ann Putnam Jr. and Mary Walcott looked smaller than their names, their cloaks soiled at the hem and their faces all eyes. They did not say much as they rode the length of Andover's main road to his house, but their presence drew more stares than Joseph liked. He led them round the side of the house past the rickety fence where his wife used to scold the hens, and into the low mudroom. The girls obeyed without question. He did not know what he'd expected, perhaps a girl to whimper or complain of the chill, or ask for food. Instead, they blinked at him, no, through him, and waited for his next instruction. He tried to think of them as doctors, healers, or some breed of small, improbable priests. But Ann Putnam Jr.'s lips trembled when she caught sight of the sick room, and Mary Walcott's hands began to twitch in a way that suggested she too felt a presence just behind her shoulder.
Through here,
he said. His voice cracked, and Ann's mouth pinched at the sound, as if the word itself had pinched her. Elizabeth's room was darker than he remembered. He had left the shutters cracked for air, but the day had turned gray, and the light that entered fell at an angle, carving everything into shadow. Ann Putnam Jr. stepped forward, feet stiff as if she was walking up a steep hill. She stood at the foot of the bed and stared at Elizabeth. Her tongue emerged between her lips, pale and damp, and a string of drool fell unbroken to her chin. Mary Walcott hovered near the door, clutching at her sleeve. Joseph cleared his throat.
This is my wife. She has not eaten in a week. Not proper. She cannot speak now, but...
Anna's head snapped toward him, eyes gleaming and suddenly angry.
Speak not,
she said. He stepped back, away from the bed, and let the girls work whatever hell they brought. The silence was heavy. The only sound was Elizabeth's raspy breathing and Anne's slow, measured sniffing, as if she tried to drink the stench of the room through her nose alone. Joseph remembered hearing that these girls could smell witchcraft, that it clung to the curse like the stink of bad onion or old meat. The thought made him suddenly aware of his own odor, and he wondered if she would turn on him instead. Mary made a low humming sound, barely audible. Her eyelids fluttered and she gripped the doorframe, white-knuckled. Ann Putnam circled the bed. She did not so much as touch Elizabeth, but her eyes were greedy, gobbling up every inch of skin and bone, memorizing the woman's features. Then she put one finger to her own lips. Mary echoed the gesture, then began to rock. For a time, nothing happened. Joseph counted 30 of Elizabeth's breaths, then lost count. He wiped sweat from his palm onto his pants. He did not believe, not truly, but the shape of his doubt was now hollowed out by the sound of these girls and their impossible calm. Abruptly, Ann Putnam bent doubled backwards, as if struck from the front. Her knees hit the floorboards with a hollow knock. She began to convulse, arms jerking at random angles, her head thrashing so that her bonnet snapped free. Joseph lurched forward, but the other girl, Mary, hissed at him to stay back. Anne's mouth opened wide, wider than Joseph thought possible. She made a dry, barking sound, then spat a mouthful of spittle into the quilt. Her eyes rolled up, showing only the whites, and then she spoke, or something in her spoke.
Who comes here?
Joseph stared, his own mouth gaping.
Who torments this house?
The voice was not Anne's. It was a broken, groan thing.
She is weak. She is emptied. She is owned.
Mary's head lolled, eyes not meeting Joseph's, but fixed on some point behind his left shoulder.
It's here,
she whispered.
What do you see?
He asked. He tried to keep the worry from his voice, but it crept in, a thin edge. Anne writhed again.
a woman, bent and broken, white hair, long nose.
Anne's finger shot up, trembling, and pointed at Elizabeth.
She sits on her chest and fills her with stones.
Joseph let out a breath he did not know he'd held.
Who is it?
Anne's neck twisted so that she looked straight at him, her stare so pitiless it seemed to boil the blood under her skin.
A witch in the village,
she said, the syllables tumbling out like a curse. Mary Walcott began to cry, softly at first, then with mounting conviction. Joseph moved to the bed and touched Elizabeth's cheek. It was wet with sweat and as cold as a cellar flagstone. He looked back at the girls, now collapsed together like dropped laundry.
Are you sure?
He asked.
You saw her?
Ann Putnam blinked, and in that instant the girl was back, her voice light and childish.
Yes,
Anne said.
I saw her face, long as a hoe handle.
She looked at the ceiling, and then she bit her lip. Mary nodded.
The witch sends her shadow, and it gnaws through the walls.
The wind outside lashed the shutters, and Joseph was reminded of his own mother's stories, the ones he had dismissed as a boy. He did not believe, not truly, but neither did he disbelieve. There was a world in which a woman could die of a wasting fever, and there was another, adjacent world, in which a witch could stretch out her hand and press her will through the thin, fraying skin of his wife. He did not know in which world he lived in now, only that it was not the same as last week. Anne tilted her face and fixed him with the certainty of a prophet.
You must drive her out, or the blackness will flood beyond this house.
Joseph thought of his sister and her baby. He thought of the line of mud tracing from his house to theirs. He thought of the neighbors who would be waiting outside, hungry for the tale. The girls stood together. Mary offered her hand to Anne, and together they walked out of the room. He heard them whispering in the entryway, voices too low to catch. Joseph went to the window and looked out across the yard. The day had turned wet and miserable. There were already 4 women standing in the lane, bonnets angled towards the house, waiting. He returned to his wife, her hand curled on her chest, the knuckles white.
I'm sorry,
he said, and meant it. The girls stepped out into the great day, thin figures against the mud-stained yard. Joseph followed, his boots sinking into the wet earth as if it wanted to claim him too. Anne's face changed the moment the air touched it. Her eyes widened, fixed on something beyond the fence line, where the group of women stood waiting for news.
There!
She hissed, finger stabbing at the air.
There she stands!
Joseph followed her gaze and saw an old woman, stooped and thin, her white hair escaping from beneath a worn hood. Anne Foster, the widow from the edge of town. She was carrying a bundle of twigs, likely for kindling, her knuckled hands gripping them like talons.
That's just the Foster widow,
he said, but his voice caught in his throat. Mary Walcott began to shake, her teeth chattering though the day wasn't cold.
She's the one, the witch who plagues your wife.
Mary's voice grew shrill, cutting the air like a blade.
She's put a curse upon her.
Anne Foster looked at them, her roomy eyes narrowing, confusion and anger etching deeper lines into her weathered face. Anne Putnam began to tremble violently.
She comes now. See how she looks at us. The devil marks her face.
Her back arched suddenly and she fell to her knees in the mud, fingers clawing at her throat.
She's choking me! Ugh! She squeezes the life from me!
Mary dropped beside her friend, limbs jerking.
I feel it too. The prickling, the burning. Release us!
Joseph stood frozen between them, his mind racing. The widow Foster had always been known for her sharp tongue, but not witchcraft. Yet now, watching Anne Foster's stooped figure through the veil of rain, Joseph felt a tremor of doubt.
Get away, witch!
Anne Putnam shrieked, her voice slicing through the humid air.
Your foul spirit torments Elizabeth Ballard. We see you for what you are.
The old woman froze, her bundle of kindling clutched to her chest like a shield. Her mouth opened, then closed, the shock evident in the sudden pallor of her already ashen face.
What madness is this?
Anne Foster finally called out, her voice reedy with age and indignation.
I've done no harm to you or yours, Joseph Ballard.
Joseph watched the performance with a sickening twist in his gut. He had invited this spectacle. He had brought it upon the village with his own desperate hands.
Enough!
He barked, his voice slicing through the girl's shrieks.
This stops now.
He grabbed Anne by her thin shoulder and hauled her to her feet. She went rigid under his touch, her eyes still rolling wildly.
Get up,
he commanded Mary, who cowered in the mud.
We are leaving.
But the witch!
Anne protested, her fingers still pointing accusingly at Anne Foster.
I said enough.
Joseph's voice cracked like a whip. The gathering crowd was silent, their hungry eyes darting between him and the afflicted girls.
Back to the cart, both of you. And you, old hag, go home and keep your words to yourself. Do not add to our plight.
Anne Foster stared at them wild-eyed, raised a hand but then decided to turn around and leave without saying another word. Joseph steered the girls towards his cart and drove off. That night, Joseph stood at the threshold and watched the river swell and threaten the banks. He wondered if it was possible to sandbag a life, To keep the blackness from rising over the lintel, he suspected not. He looked out the window towards the main road and saw a figure, barely. It was hard to see with the rain and darkness, but he thought he could make out Anne Foster herself, standing in the wet yard, her head bowed against the rain, her hands folded like a penitent's. She said nothing, but her presence was its own indictment. Joseph watched her for a long time, and she watched him back, until at last he could bear it no longer, and he closed the shutter. The next day, Anne Foster and Joseph Ballard were summoned to the parson's house. Accusations of witchcraft followed. Joseph no longer cared. He wanted nothing to do with it. There would be an inquiry against Anne Foster, perhaps even a trial. Joseph half listened, then went home and sat in the dark beside Elizabeth, who slept now with her mouth open, her breathing rattling the window panes. In the weeks that followed, Andover shuddered and bucked. More names were named, more stories told. Children became prophets, and men like Joseph found themselves living not in a world of sense, but in one of sentence and rumor. His wife Elizabeth lingered, then faded, then went. He buried her beneath the apple tree she had once loved, the one that never bore fruit, and stood over her grave as the river rose and threatened the banks. He would have prayed, but he did not trust words anymore. Instead, he stood with his hat in his hands and listened to the house behind him, empty now, but for the wind. He wondered who would haunt it first, his wife or himself. He wondered if it mattered, and when the day was done, and the world had finished with him for another night, he walked inside, closed the door, and waited for the next storm. On July 16th, 1692, Anne Foster was brought into Salem village in the belly of a wagon, jolted from Andover with her hands lashed and her bones rattling. The room they brought her to was all angles, iron latch and grey wood. Light siphoned through the pocket glass in sick, misshapen squares. Nothing in the chamber was level. The floor sloped. The bench wobbled beneath Anne Foster's haunches, and even the beams above bent as if under the weight of some inarticulate purpose. The magistrates sat higher than the rest on an uneven dais, black coats and collars like a roost of scavenger birds. She could not keep her hands still, not because of fear, but because her old joints had frozen by increments over the winter. And now every movement rattled her bones. Her wrists lolled in the restraints as if they had been detached by accident. A plain hood pressed her hair to her skull. She remembered, with a flicker of pride, that it was the only clean thing she owned.
Anne Foster, 77 years old, wife to the late Andrew Foster of Andover,
the scribe intoned. His words felt larger than the man himself, who was pink and sweaty, with a tremor in his lips and an ink blot on his cuff.
Hey,
she said, voice a flicker above a whisper.
Stand,
came from the dais. Magistrate John Hawthorne, his face hawk-like but not hungry. He regarded her with the eyes of a man who pitied the weak, but only as an inconvenience. She made a show of bracing herself, rising a fraction before her knees buckled.
A widow,
Hawthorne said.
And a mother. You have 2 sons and a daughter, is that not so?
Anne did not look at her children, though she could sense their hunched presence to the right. She did not dare look at them, not from shame but to protect them. They sat together, heads downcast, among a clutch of onlookers, neighbors, petty men with axes to grind, the afflicted girls whose names already curdled her mind.
it is so,
Anne said, and sat again without permission. Then the first affront came.
Are you a witch?
No,
Anne said. She watched the scribe's quill pause in the air, uncertain.
never have been.
The quill scratched. Denial. Hawthorne's lips puckered.
We have it from several here and from your own town that you have been a torment to many, that your spectre...
He inclined his head towards the far bench, where a trembling girl with unbraided hair wept into her sleeve.
has been seen pinching, choking, and even tempting with poppets and cakes.
Anne let the words slide across her like cold rain.
There are lies abroad,
She said.
many lies. I am an old woman. I can scarce keep my own hearth, let alone mount such mischief.
Old women are oft the devil's most patient students,
murmured the other magistrate, Corwin, pale as butter gone to mold.
It is known.
There was a sound. A cough or a smothered laugh. She saw the accusing girl Mary Walcott from the corner of her eye, watching, biting her lip.
You have been named,
Corwin said.
And not once. Several of the afflicted give their witness.
Anne Foster fixed her gaze towards the floor. She waited. Hawthorne rapped his knuckles on the plank.
Goody Foster, look upon these children.
They turned her head by force, fingers not cruel but perfunctory, as if she were livestock in need of inspection. She saw at the front bench the afflicted, Ann Putnam Jr., quivering in her mother's lap, and Mary Walcott, cheeks flushed. The girls she did not know, the girls that had accused her in the village, their faces twisted with a kind of rapture, their hands clung at each other, like little spiderlings in a jar. The instant Ann Foster's eyes met Ann Putnam's, the girl shrieked. It was a rusty, strangling sound. She arched and twisted, her arms pinwheeling, before collapsing onto the boards.
Did you see?
Corwin said, smirking with the left side of his mouth.
She hath not touched her. The malice acts at a distance.
Someone in the gallery muttered,
Witch's sight!
A rippling hiss went through the room.
Do you deny afflicting these children?
Hawthorne pressed.
I have afflicted no one,
Ann Foster said. She wished her voice were stronger. The girls were at it again, sudden fits, low howls, hair torn. It was not like any sickness she'd nursed. The mothers behind them wrung their hands, faces pinched as if from a sharp tooth. The sound throbbed through the room, and the men could only wait it out, as if the fit were a storm or a necessary labor. Once it stopped, Hawthorne leaned forward.
How long have you been in league with the devil, Goody Foster?
I am not,
she said.
I am an old woman, and I love Christ as I love my own children and theirs.
Hawthorne sneered.
Do you say these girls lie?
She looked at the girls, at the raw faces, at the mothers with red eyes behind them. Then she looked at her own daughter, seated in the back, face unreadable as chalk. Her granddaughter was beside her, head down, fingers mangling the hem of her sleeve.
I say the devil makes mischief wherever men permit it, sir.
Corwin leaned into the candlelight. So close the hair at his chin seemed to burn gold.
You are accused, Goody Foster, of signing the devil's book. Do you deny it?
I deny it.
No! Lies! She lies!
The afflicted girl screamed as one. It was so abrupt that the sound seemed to wrench the timbers. Ann Putnam's mother fell back, clutching her own breast. Mary Walcott seized and hit her head on the rail. The thin girl, Sarah, flung both arms towards Goody Foster, shrieking,
She bites! She bites my tongue!
Hawthorne did not blink.
Confess, and the Lord may show mercy. Lie, and you stand as Judas before damnation.
Ann Foster's vision swam. In the back, her daughter was not looking at her but at the magistrates. The granddaughter's knuckles were white, the dress fabric stained with sweat. She tried to remember the child's laugh, how it had sounded in her kitchen before all this. There was nothing left of it. She took a long, shaky breath. Someone began to cough, a dry and spattering thing. In a moment, the crowd was hushed again. Corwin said,
Goody Foster, do you know a Goody Carrier?
She nodded. Everyone knew Martha Carrier.
It is said you met with her, and other witches, in her circle, at the pasture, beyond the stone wall. Is it not true?
No, sir,
she said. The question bored into her like a hot needle.
Did you not meet in secret? Speak in strange tongues, dance around a fire?
She looked at the girls who peered at her with wild, expectant eyes. She looked at the men whose faces were made of old bark and stone.
No,
she said. But now she could hear her voice as the crowd did, weak, hesitant, and doomed. The words stuck in her throat.
Goody Foster, answer plain. Have you been to the devil's meetings?
Hawthorne said.
No, never.
Her lips barely moved. He did not let her rest.
Did you or did you not kill John Lovejoy's hog with a curse?
I never saw his hog.
It was a lie. She had seen it rooting through her turnips last spring. It was a greedy beast. There was a lurch, as if the room tilted on its beams.
Did you not fashion puppets and stick them with pins? We found them in your house. The word is they resemble the Allen child, who perished by your hand.
Anne Foster's head was spinning. The Allen child had died, yes, and she had wept at the burial. It was fever, nothing more. But every sickness became malice when the village needed it. She tried to pray, but the words scattered. There was only the dull rhythm of accusation, a dirge that would not break.
Have you not, Goody Foster, been a witch for years and years?
No, no.
The word was barely a sound.
Would you lie before God and your kin?
Corwin said. She looked for her daughter, but the woman's face was shuttered. So unlike the girl who once nursed kittens and sang psalms off-key. The granddaughter was crying silently, and Goody Foster thought of how her own mother died with curses in her mouth, and whether she too would be damned for it.
I never was a witch,
she said, and tasted bile. Then another question, a hand gripping her shoulder, the afflicted girls again erupting, their bodies twisted into grotesque shapes, howling her name as if it were their only hope for survival. She wanted to say it. This is a farce. She wanted to say, let me go home, I will trouble you no more. She wanted to say nothing at all, to become a stone or a scrap of fog or a stain on the floor. But instead, she sat, the whole room breathing down her neck, and she waited for the next blow to fall. The magistrates hammered at her with more questions, with more frantic scribbling of the scribe, with the gasps of the crowd, with the terrible lashing fits of the children. It was a kind of thunder, never ceasing, and in the lulls, she heard the soft animal noises of her own exhaustion. By the end, she was ruined. Her tongue was thick, her hands ached where the restraints had cut her, and her heart beat so slowly she wondered if it would just stop. She wondered if her children would be made orphans by fear. They brought her out again into the glare of the street, and the crowd was thicker than ever. Someone spat, someone else threw a pebble. It struck her knee with a soft, dumb pain. She wanted to cry, but there were no more tears. In the distance, the blackbirds watched, silent as the grave. By dusk, Anne Foster was no longer a woman, but a vessel for accusation, poured out and refilled until the marrow of her was brine. They put her in the jail, where the chill licked up from the stone and the darkness pressed from all sides. She half slept, curled on straw, her wrists and ankles raw. When they brought her a crust, she tried to eat, but her mouth was too dry. She thought of her first winter as a bride. She thought of her dead, the ones she had buried, and the ones who had simply vanished. She wondered if this was the hell the men of Salem feared. The next morning, she was wrenched from the jail to stand again before the magistrates, in the same room, the same faces. There were more of them this time. The air was feverish, the heat and breath and shame of 100 souls turned to vapor. On the benches, behind the magistrates, the scribe had new quills at the ready. The Salem girls were there with their mothers, lips split from biting. They sat Anne Foster on a stool in the center. They left her hands unbound. This, she knew, was not mercy. Hawthorne's voice was a lash.
Anne Foster, have you made covenant with the Prince of Darkness?
She had not eaten or drunk since the night before. There was a taste in her mouth like burnt nails. The room seemed to tilt as swell. It was as if the very walls were drawing breath, waiting.
No,
she said, the sound barely audible.
Are you certain? Your accusers are many. They say you have been seen at the devil's Sabbath, that you have been heard promising your soul to him for favors. They say you have danced around the maypole and consorted with imps and familiars, that you have pinched and played the young by supernatural means.
She did not answer, for what could she say? Denial only sharpened the hunger in their eyes. Hawthorne's voice grew colder.
If you do not confess, the consequences will be eternal. If you do, perhaps the Lord will forgive.
From the benches there was a murmur as if in sympathy with the court. A silence fell. The magistrates' faces, pale and relentless, waited. Anne Foster looked down at her hands. The fingers were bent and knuckled like a root, the nails cracked to the quick. She had used those hands to birth children and bury them, to card wool and break ice and mend wounds. She tried to remember the last time they had trembled so.
Speak, Anne Foster,
said Corwin.
Speak truth, and God may yet have mercy.
Her mouth worked soundlessly, fish-like, before the words tumbled out, dry and broken, nothing of her own voice in them.
I have seen the devil.
A gust went through the benches, a ripple of satisfaction.
Speak it, so all may hear.
She raised her head and forced her voice up from the pit of her.
I have seen the devil.
How did he appear to you?
Asked Hawthorne. She searched her memory for anything, any shape or story that would satisfy.
As a man, black of hair, black of coat, with eyes like embers.
This description pleased them. She could see it in their posture.
Did he bid you sign his book?
Yes.
Did you sign it?
Yes.
She could not reconcile the lie, but it was easier than the truth. And maybe, just maybe, you could save her.
With what did you sign?
My blood.
The scribe took notes in a hasty hand.
Did you, with others, meet at his bidding?
She nodded, barely.
With whom did you meet?
She hesitated, and the room held its breath.
Goody Carrier, and others. I cannot remember the names.
Try,
said Corwin.
You must try.
She thought of the ones already dead or condemned.
Goody Baker, Goody Green, Goody Tyler.
She recited the names as if from a shopping list, each one a stone thrown in a well.
What did you do at these meetings?
Asked Hawthorne.
We made a circle. We danced. The devil gave us cake to eat.
Did you afflict the Allen child?
Asked Corwin. This time, the lie came easier.
Yes.
How?
I took wax and shaped it into a puppet. Stuck it with a pin. Said the child's name aloud.
She could not meet the mother's eyes.
Afterward, the child was ill, then died.
There was a murmur, half sob, half victory throughout the gallery.
Why did you do it?
Asked Hawthorne. She almost said I did not, but the man would not have it.
Because Goody Carrier told me to. Because she said the devil would tear me in pieces if I did not obey.
Hawthorne and Corwin exchanged a look.
Did you fly to your meeting in a pole or a stick?
Corwin asked. She nodded.
Describe it.
We met at the stone pasture at midnight, and we each mounted a pole. Goody Carrier showed me how. The poles lifted us over the fields. My skirt caught the wind. We flew across the fields, but the pole broke. I fell, but managed to grab onto Goody Carrier and held on. We landed hard. My leg was hurt.
She remembered now, the bruise from falling off a wagon years ago. How her shin had ballooned purple and yellow. She tried to smile, but instead, a tear dropped from her right eye. A low murmur ran through the crowd, some horrified, some hungry for the story.
Did you see the Reverend Burroughs at these meetings?
Asked Corwin. She hesitated, sensing this was a test.
Yes,
She said,
he was there.
Doing what?
He preached to us. He made us swear loyalty to the devil.
Did you hear anything about a greater plan? A plan of witches gathering to bring ruin against the villages?
She hesitated, but then said,
Goody Carrier said there were 305 of us in the whole country, that we would meet again, and the villages would fall.
The scribe was writing so fast his wrist trembled.
Are these things true, Anne Foster? Will you swear to them before God?
Asked Hawthorne. She wanted to say no, wanted to swallow the lie and die with it inside her. But the eyes in the room had no mercy. If she recanted, they would hang her and take the rest of her family for themselves.
I swear.
She said, and the world went gray at the edges.
Do you repent of these wicked acts?
Corwin said. She nodded. She did, but not in the way the men meant it. Hawthorne pressed.
You must say it. You must beg for forgiveness, or your soul is damned.
She choked out the words.
I repent. I am sorry for my sins. Please forgive me.
The magistrates sat back, both relief and disgust on their faces. For a moment, the room was utterly silent except for the scratch of the pen. When they led her away, she expected the crowd to spit or strike her again, but they parted before her, eyes averted. Back in the jail, Goody Foster curled on the straw and wept. The sound did not echo in that place. It was soaked up, as all things were, by the wooden beams and the wet stone. When the fit of weeping passed, she stared at the wall. She could not remember if her own daughter had been present. She could not remember the faces of her dead. There was only the sour taste of the lie, and the certainty that she would never wake from it. In her mind, she saw the book. It was open, page after page, crowded with the names of the accused, the condemned, the vanished. She saw her own name scratched in blood, and wondered if her confession would save her family, or only doom them alongside her. She was tired and desolate, and so she slept, asleep without dreams. On July 19th, the day dawned white and pitiless over Salem jail. Anne Foster lay in her cell, the pain in her legs fading to a numb calm that felt like dying. Her daughter Mary had come that morning, eyes hollow from tears, to bring a scrap of bread and a worn shawl. News had spread that 5 women were hanged the day before, and that those who confessed might yet live. When the cell door closed behind Mary, Anne sat listening to the distant bells and the crows, holding the shawl like a final mercy. Days later, Mary Lacey Sr., Anne Foster's daughter, rose to the sound of her name called by the constable. The summons had been expected. In the meeting house, the magistrates questioned her about her mother's confession and the rumors of witchcraft in her blood. The room smelled of polish and fear. She answered as best she could, but the questions turned sharp, pressing for names, for proof, for guilt. At last, cornered by the threat and weariness, Mary gave them what they wanted. Lies, perhaps, but the kind that let her walk out alive in a sun that felt colder than before. Soon, her daughter, Mary Lacey Jr., was brought to the same room, barefoot, trembling. She faced the magistrates who spoke her family's name as though reciting a curse. The questions repeated, growing crueler, until her thoughts blurred and truth slipped from her grasp. By the time they released her, she no longer knew what she had said, or what had been written in her name. In the weeks that followed, silence filled her home. Neighbors stopped coming. Each creak of the floorboards sounded like the rope tightening above the gallows. Then the news came. All 3 women were accused of witchcraft: grandmother, mother, and daughter. That night, The wind tore at the house, and Mary Lacey Jr. prayed not for salvation, but for the gift of forgetting. Anne Foster spent the first weeks of August lashed to the wall by an iron chain. It abraded her ankle, seeping blood into the straw, and when she shifted at night, the metal teeth gnawed louder than her own whimpers. The air was a syrup of mildew, candle drippings, and the filth of those who had lain there before her. Sleep was brief. She dreamt of water running backwards, of blackbirds multiplying until they blotted the sky, of a voice calling her daughter's name, but warped, as if through a frozen pond. When she woke, her limbs screamed with a memory of pain, or hunger, or both. They came for her 2 or 3 times a week, never the same men in the same order. Sometimes it was the magistrate Corwin, sometimes the scribe, who had begun to shave his head against the lice, and who eyed her with the precise fascination of a butcher in the market. Most days, it was the constable, whose breath reeked of beer and whose eyes found interest only in her trembling hands. The questions had become relentless, senseless. Where once they hunted with knives, now they battered her with their fists. Anne Foster, did you fly with the witch's last new moon? Whose hands guided you to the Sabbath? How many did you see at the gathering by the stone pasture? Who was there? She answered as she could. Sometimes the words came easily, sometimes they came made of dust. But always the men wrote them down. They forced her to sign or to make her mark, though her right hand had swollen into a waxy claw. The days blurred. Sometimes she imagined her daughter's face on the other side of the bars, lips moving but voice lost in the grind of keys and boots. Sometimes she heard her mother's voice, ragged and distant, singing a lullaby to no one. She told herself she would hold on for Mary and for her granddaughter. But most days, it was a memory of spite that kept her from simply closing her eyes and drifting out of the world. By the end of August, Anne Foster had become a rumor in the jail, a huddle of rags that coughed blood and slept with their eyes open. The men who brought her to and from the chamber did not speak to her or about her, except to ask if she could walk, or if the mat would have to be dragged through the mud again. She marked time by the sounds beyond her door, the bell that rang out executions, the weeping of the girls, the steady churn of feet in the corridor. Sometimes she saw the glint of sunlight on the yard stones and tried to remember what it was to be warm. September brought more than cold. The trials roared into a fever. Each morning, the afflicted were marched in pairs to the meeting house, their arms bandaged, their hair hacked short to keep them from swallowing pins. They accused, and never once turned their eyes away from the crowd. Anne heard her own name before she was summoned, a faint echo from the lips of someone else, Goody Baker perhaps, or the widow whose dog had died in the spring. Anne Foster bid me do it, they said. She gave me the charm. She signed the book with her crooked mark. The words tangled in the rafters and dropped into her ears as she closed her eyes, trying to will herself into nothingness. By the end of September, the verdict was sealed. Anne Foster was indicted for covenant with the devil. The sentence, death by hanging. The day itself was a blur, a smear of voices and cold light. Now, in the damp dark of her cell, she waited, not for mercy, but for the moment her suffering would end. By October, the air in Salem shifted. It was not the wind, nor the sullen hush of the fields preparing for snow, but the silence that crept up the lanes and settled in the mouths of the villagers. News traveled in clots, first a rumor, then a voice raised in disbelief, then a whole chorus of denial. It started with the ministers, Increase Mather, a man with a tongue too heavy for most ears. He spoke from his pulpit that the devil could take the shape of innocents as well as the guilty. His words landed in Salem like embers. The men who had stoked the fire for months now found it hard to look one another in the face. Joseph Ballard heard it first at the mill.
They say the court is doubting itself,
said the miller.
They say the evidence is no evidence at all.
Ballard said nothing. He was a man of few words, but now even silence seemed dangerous. He remembered the day his wife first sickened. The doctor had shrugged, the minister had shaken his head. In the end, it was Ballard who fetched the girls from Salem village, the ones who could spot a witch at a glance. Ballard's wife was gone, but no justice had been served. For him, there was only suffering and remorse. In the fields, the harvest was less than last year, and the men no longer blamed it on witches. They blamed the weather, or the seeds, or God himself, but never the woman in the jail. Ballard walked the rows alone, hearing the crunch of his own boots, the distant caw of birds who had returned after the hanging stopped. One Sunday, the village gathered at the meeting house. The benches were packed, but the usual heat was missing. The minister read from the book, voice thin as milk. He said, "It is not for us to judge, but for God. Be wary of those who seek the devil in every shadow." The congregation listened, but no one looked up. After the service, Ballard stood in the yard, feeling the sun like a stranger's hand on his face. He overheard two women speaking by the stoop. They said the jails are still full of the witches. They said the governor ordered them all set loose. One of them said that they would sooner die than be let out after all that. He looked away, finding nothing in the sky to hold his gaze. That night, a man from the town council came to his door. He brought a paper, heavy with seals. He told him that Governor Phipps had dissolved the court, that the matter was closed for now. Ballard nodded, took the paper, but did not bother to read it. After the man left, he sat at the table and tried to write a letter. He wanted to say he was sorry, but the words made no sense. He tore up the page and fed it to the fire. On the last day of October, Ballard walked to the river. He stood at the bank, watching the water slide past. He tried to imagine what it would be like to slip in, to let the current carry him far from the village and the court and the noise of his own heart. Behind him, the blackbirds gathered, silent as ever, watching him with eyes that had seen all of this before. In the prison cell, the lamps burned lower. They no longer dragged Anne Foster from the room for questioning. She saw no one but the rats. The chain at her ankle had rusted shut. When she tried to stand, it pulled her down like a leash. She listened for the sounds of life in the corridors, the clatter of keys, the slap of boots, but they grew fewer each day. The world was moving on, and she was left behind. Once, near the end of the month, the jailer brought her a cup of milk.
"The court's gone home,"
he said.
"They won't be coming back."
What will happen to me?
Anne asked.
"You have been pardoned, but your family can't afford the bail fees. As soon as they can pay, you will be set free."
She took the cup and drank, too weak to feel relief or to smile, but with a tiny inkling of hope. December came, and so did the first snow on the day that Anne Foster died. She did not notice it, the snow. The air tasted only of stone and filth. Her body had collapsed in on itself, ribs knitted tight, hair falling out in clumps. She thought often of her children and grandchildren, but mostly she thought of river water, cold, rushing, unceasing. The night before, her daughter Mary brought her a crust of bread and a mug of thin broth.
"You are remembered. We will get you out as soon as we can,"
she said, but her eyes did not meet Anne's, and her hands trembled as she set down the food. Anne tried to eat. She managed half the bread before her teeth rebelled, and the rest she left for the rats. She sipped the broth, its salt sharp on her tongue, and lay down on the straw. She felt herself drifting, not toward sleep, but toward a thin, clean quiet. She dreamed of the river again, the banks glazed with ice, the water glassy and black. She saw her daughter on the far shore, arms raised in greeting or farewell. The wind scoured her face, and she smiled for the first time in years. In the morning, the jailer found her curled like a seed, lips blue, hands folded at her breast. He covered her with a rag of blanket and shut the door behind him. Only her family mourned her. The jailers burned her clothes and buried her body in the pit behind the jail, marked only by a mound of frozen dirt. Some weeks later, Anne's family wrote to the authorities. They begged for the return of their mother's remains, or for news of her burial, or for the name to be cleared for the thing that had never been a crime. The letter was filed away. It would take nearly 20 years for the courts to acknowledge that mistakes were made. Mary Lacey Jr. grew thin and quiet, but she survived. She learned to bake with less flour, to sweep the stoop twice each morning, to carry secrets the way some girls carried lockets. She never spoke of her grandmother, but sometimes, in the leanest months, she would leave a scrap of bread at the edge of the wood, for the birds, she would say, and watch as they descended in silence, black wings flashing in the cold. The river ran on, winter and spring, but the riverbank never forgot. Years later, the colony of Massachusetts admitted it had been wrong. They cleared Anne Foster's name and paid her family a few pounds in restitution. It's easy to think that the witch trials were just superstition, something that could never happen now. But fear has a way of changing people. It twists love, turns truth into suspicion, and it can twist ordinary people into doing unimaginable things. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone you think might like it. Thanks for listening, and until next time, for another episode of Lore and Crime.